NASA couldn't make it to the moon, and they knew it. In the late 50s, when I was working with the Advanced Design Group at Rocketdyne, they determined that the chances of getting to the moon safely and back were 17/10,000%. The body of existing evidence proves that we never went to the moon. There is no doubt in my mind that we did not have the technology to go in 1969, and we certainly do not have it now. After President Kennedy's foolish announcement, NASA undoubtedly continued with the actual missions, but they had a backup plan. It was the Apollo simulation project, and NASA hired the best man to direct it, Stanley Kubrick. They also had more and better equipment for filming anything than all of the movie studios in Hollywood combined. Stanley Kubrick, who had just filmed his own movie, 2001, was the ideal man to do the Apollo fake film. You see, he had access to global aerospace technology, and all the firms that participated in his own film, 2001. So it was ideal that Stanley do the Apollo fake film. Apollo 11 was completely bogus, but it was masterfully staged. Collins, Armstrong, and Aldrin were loaded into the Saturn V rocket, which took off, and they simply disappeared. Then, while they were allegedly on the way to the moon, the video presentation by NASA was shown to the public. But this, of course, was completely fake. Then, after being transferred into a C-5 airplane, the three astronauts were parachuted back into the ocean in the Pacific for a successful but fake landing.
When I began looking into the accusation that the moon landings were fraudulent, I didn't believe it myself. I was a big fan of the space program, and as a kid had several pictures of the moon landing on my wall for years. What I did discover was a previously unseen reel of footage from the first mission to the moon of the astronauts actually staging part of the photography.
Stanley Kubrick was a perfectionist. This is evident in all of the films that he made, including the Apollo fake film. However, even though he paid close attention to details, he was unable to convince investigators who found errors in his film. But despite this, he was still able to convince millions of people throughout the world that we really did go to the moon.
The Soviets did not have the capability to track deep spacecraft until after Apollo 17, the last mission to the moon. Once they achieved that technology to track the spacecraft, the last two missions were scrubbed. Now, if the Soviets found out later that the moon missions were staged through espionage, at first glance you might think that they would blurt this out to the world, but I don't think so. They have this morsel worth a tremendous amount of power and influence. Just before the completion of my documentary, I discovered a never-before-seen unedited tape of behind-the-scenes photography from Apollo 11. It says on the screen, "This is not for public distribution," in big letters. After viewing the tape, you figure out why, because they're doing multiple takes of false photography of the mission dated 3 days into the flight. It didn't take long to discover why NASA did not want this tape seen by the public. On the tape, the astronauts are clearly falsifying part of the mission photography. This is raw, unedited footage of the crew of Apollo 11 staging part of their mission photography for playback later. How do I know this? Because they tell us so in the conversations that they were having that they assumed would be edited out.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
What's more, the reel is slated and dated July 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1969, the very days of the mission in which they were supposed to be approaching and achieving lunar orbit. And there's another problem. Armstrong's state said he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, and that they only have one window that faces the Earth and it's blocked with the TV camera. If the window were completely filled up with the TV camera, if he were telling the truth about the position of the camera and him being halfway to the moon, then how could an astronaut's arm get between the camera and the Earth as it does in this outtake? If they genuinely went to the moon, why would they be faking any part of it? And if they're faking being halfway to the moon, then that means they could not go halfway. They could not leave Earth orbit. And if Apollo 11's equipment cannot leave Earth orbit, how could Apollo 17's equipment, which was identical?